The 5 signs you are slipping into depression without realizing it. You know, life has this funny way of slipping past us, doesn't it? One day you're handling things, moving through the world with energy and purpose, and the next, it feels like you've lost your way. But here's the thing often, it's not some grand event that knocks us off balance. It's subtle, it's quiet, it's like a slow, invisible drift, a creeping fog that settles in without us even noticing. One day wake up and realize we've been consumed by something we didn't even see coming. Depression can be like that, deceptively silent, yet profoundly heavy. We often think of depression as this dramatic, overwhelming force, but the truth is, it can sneak up on us in ways that seem harmless at first. That's why today, we're going to talk about 5 signs that you might be slipping into depression without even realizing it. These aren't the obvious signs that everyone talks about. No, these are the subtle shifts that start long before you're aware something is wrong. Let's start with the first sign you stop caring about the things you once loved. Think about it, you used to have certain passions, right? Maybe it was painting, maybe it was running, maybe it was running, maybe it was something as simple as watching your favorite show. But now you can't even muster the enthusiasm to start, and you tell yourself, it's just a phase or I'm just tired, but what if it's more than that? What if this gradual disinterest is the first sign that something deeper is at play? Ask yourself this: when was the last time you really felt excited about something? If it's been a while, that's a red flag. The things that once brought you joy are no longer lighting you up, and you've convinced yourself that it's normal. But is it? The second sign: you're constantly exhausted, no matter how much you rest. Sure, life is tiring, there's no denying that. But there's a difference between being physically tired and being emotionally drained. Depression doesn't just weigh on your mind, it weighs on your body. You can sleep for hours, you can take breaks, but no amount of rest seems to refresh you. Why? Because it's not physical exhaustion you're dealing with. It's the exhaustion of carrying an emotional weight you don't even realize you're holding. Have you ever woken up and thought, why do I still feel tired? That's not just fatigue. That's your mind signaling that something deeper is going on. And if you ignore it, that exhaustion can become all-consuming. Now, let's talk about the third sign: you withdraw from people, even those you care about. This is a tricky one because we often justify it in so many ways. I'm just busy or I need some space, we tell ourselves. But there's a difference between needing alone time and actively avoiding connection. Depression has this insidious way of making you feel like a burden. You convince yourself that people don't want to hear from you, that they're better off without you reaching out. So you withdraw, slowly, quietly. And the longer you stay disconnected, the harder it becomes to reach out. Have you noticed yourself pulling away lately? If so, that's not just needing me time, it's a sign that something deeper is driving you to isolate yourself. The fourth sign: you feel numb more often than you feel sad. This one surprises a lot of people. We tend to think of depression as overwhelming sadness, but more often than not, it's a dull, pervasive numbness. You're not crying, you're not breaking down. Instead, it's like life has lost its sharpness, its meaning. Everything feels a little flat. You're going through the motions, but nothing really moves you. Not happiness, not grief, just nothing. And this numbness, it's dangerous because it's easy to ignore. You might even convince yourself that you're fine after all. You're not sad, right? But ask yourself, do you feel alive? Or do you feel like you're just existing? If it's the latter, that's a major sign that something is off. Finally, the fifth sign: you can't remember the last time you felt truly hopeful about the future. Hope is a fragile thing, and when it starts to slip away, we don't always notice right away. It's not like you wake up one day and suddenly feel hopeless. It's more like a slow erosion. You stop making plans. You stop dreaming about what's next. You convince yourself that the future is just something you have to get through, and that's the thing. Depression doesn't always feel like despair. Sometimes it just feels like nothing. Like the future is this vast, empty space that doesn't hold any promise. Have you stopped looking forward to things? Have you stopped imagining a future where things get better? If so, that's not just pessimism. That's a sign that your mind is slipping into a darker place. So, now that we've explored these 5 signs, I want you to reflect. Do any of these resonate with you? Maybe one? Maybe all? The hardest part about depression is that it's not always obvious when it's happening. It doesn't announce itself with loud cries for help. It comes quietly, subtly, weaving itself into your daily life until you don't even notice it's there. The silent erosion, how depression redefines your reality. Think about this for a moment. How often do we go through life based on the assumption that we're in control, that we're fully aware of our mental and emotional states? We believe we know what's happening in our heads because, after all, it's our mind, right? But what if I told you that depression is like a slow erosion of that awareness, a subtle, silent shift that starts to redefine the way we see reality without us ever realizing it? You see, depression doesn't usually come crashing into your life like a thunderstorm. It's more like a slow, creeping fog. And this fog distorts everything: your perceptions, your emotions, even your sense of time. What once felt vibrant and full of possibility now feels muted, dull, like you're living behind a thick pane of glass. You can see the world, but you can't quite connect with it. Have you ever felt that? Like you're watching your own life from a distance. This is the terrifying part about depression. It redefines your reality so slowly that you don't even notice it happening. One day you wake up and realize that the things that used to matter don't matter anymore. And the future. It's not something you're excited about, it's something you're trying to survive. But here's the question: when did that shift happen? Can you pinpoint the exact moment when your outlook on life changed? Or did it happen so gradually that it slipped past you, unnoticed? Let's go deeper into this. Have you ever noticed how depression affects your sense of time? Days blur together. Weeks pass without you feeling like anything meaningful happened. It's as if you're drifting through life, not really grounded in the present moment. And this sense of drifting, it's one of the most subtle yet powerful ways depression takes hold. You start to feel like you're just going through the motions, as if life is something that's happening to you rather than something you're actively participating in. But why does this happen? Why does depression have this strange ability to warp your sense of time and detach you from the present? There's a philosophical element to this question that we can't ignore. When you're in the grip of depression, your mind is constantly looking inward. You're not engaging with the world around you. Instead, you're trapped in endless loops of thoughts. And because you're so focused on what's going on in your head, your worries, your doubts, your fears, you lose touch with the outside world. Time starts to feel meaningless because you're not really in it anymore. You're stuck in a kind of mental limbo. This brings us to a deeper question: if our perception of reality can shift so drastically without us even realizing it, then how much of what we experience is truly real? How much of our reality is shaped by our mental state? When you're depressed, the world doesn't just feel different, it is different. Your mind is filtering everything through a lens of negativity, making it hard to see anything clearly. You might convince yourself that things will never get better, that life is inherently meaningless, or that you're not worthy of happiness. But here's the thing: none of those thoughts are true. They feel true, but that's the distortion. Have you ever looked back at a time when you were depressed and thought, how did I ever believe those things about myself? That's the fog lifting. At the moment, it's almost impossible to see clearly, but once you're out of it, you realize just how skewed your perspective has become. Depression distorts your reality, but it does so in such a convincing way that it feels like the truth. And that's one of the most dangerous aspects of it. Now, let's talk about something that often goes unnoticed: the small, daily decisions that depression influences without you even realizing it. Maybe it's skipping a shower because you just don't feel like it, or putting off a task because it seems overwhelming. These small acts of avoidance start to pile up, and over time, they create a feedback loop. You avoid something because you feel too tired or unmotivated, and then you feel worse because you've avoided it. It's a vicious cycle, and it's incredibly hard to break once you're in it. But here's where things get really philosophical. What if these small decisions, these seemingly insignificant moments of avoidance, are the true battlegrounds where depression is fought? We often think that depression is about the big, dramatic moments, crying spells, breakdowns, or feelings of despair. But in reality, it's the accumulation of these tiny decisions that slowly shape your mindset. Every choice to withdraw, to avoid, to disengage is like a small stone added to the weight you're carrying, and eventually that weight becomes unbearable. So, I ask you, how many of your daily decisions are being dictated by depression without you even noticing? Have you pulled back from things that used to matter to you? Have you started to let little tasks slip because they feel too overwhelming? These are the subtle signs that depression is redefining your reality, one small decision at a time. But here's the hopeful part: just as depression creeps in through small decisions, we can begin to reverse it the same way. It's not about making huge, sweeping changes overnight. It's about recognizing those tiny moments and making different choices, even if they feel insignificant at first. Each time you choose to engage, to face the task, to reach out to someone, you're fighting back. You're reclaiming your reality, one decision at a time. The illusion of control: how depression hides behind everyday choices. Now, let's dig even deeper into something we rarely consider control. We like to believe we're in control of our lives, our choices, and our emotions. But depression has a cunning way of hiding behind the everyday decisions we make, making us feel like we're still in charge when, in reality, it's subtly steering the ship. Think about it. You wake up and decide to stay in bed a little longer because you're tired. You skip that workout because it's just one day you don't reply to a friend's message because you'll get to it later. These seem like ordinary, harmless choices, right? But when you start stacking them up, they reveal something deeper. These aren't just random decisions, they're symptoms. They're small acts of surrender, where depression starts to take control of your life without you realizing it. Have you ever noticed how depression convinces you that you're making decisions based on logic, when it's really just feeding your mind excuses? For example, you might tell yourself you're staying home because you need rest. But is it really the rest you're after, or is it avoidance? Are you avoiding the discomfort of social interaction, the effort of engaging with life, or the potential for failure? Depression is sneaky like that. It doesn't announce itself. It hides behind rationalizations, convincing you that you're still making the right choices, even as it quietly narrows your world. Let's go further. What if some of the things you think you're choosing are not really choices at all? What if they're habits, automatic responses that depression has conditioned you to follow? For example, not picking up the phone when someone calls because it feels too draining, or staying in bed because the thought of facing the world seems impossible. These aren't conscious choices anymore, they're reactions, and the more you repeat them, the more they become ingrained. Here's the philosophical question: at what point do we lose the ability to recognize the difference between a conscious choice and a conditioned response? When do we stop being in control of our decisions and start being controlled by them? This is where depression gets dangerous. It creates the illusion of control. You think you're still calling the shots, but over time you realize you've been reacting to life rather than actively engaging with it. The scariest part: you don't even notice when it happens. You might wake up one day and ask yourself, how did I get here? When did I start living this way? But here's the hopeful truth. Just as depression relies on these small, hidden decisions to take hold, you can also use small, intentional actions to take back control. It starts with awareness, recognizing when you're making a choice versus when you're slipping into a habit of avoidance. Every time you choose to act, to engage, to push back against that invisible force pulling you inward, you're reclaiming your agency. You're breaking the illusion of control that depression has created. So ask yourself, how many of your choices today were truly yours? How many were influenced by something deeper, something you might not even be fully aware of? The path back: reclaiming yourself through small acts of defiance. Here's where the journey shifts. Once you recognize the subtle ways depression has influenced your daily choices, you face a crucial question: how do you take back control? The truth is, recovery isn't about grand gestures or sudden transformations. No, the path back is far more humble. It's built on small, deliberate acts of defiance, tiny decisions that, over time, create a ripple effect in your life. Let's think about this for a moment. Depression thrives in stagnation. It loves when you sit still, when you avoid, when you remain passive. So what's the most radical thing you can do? Move. Act. Choose something, no matter how small, that challenges the inertia depression has imposed on you. Maybe that means getting out of bed just 5 minutes earlier. Maybe it's taking a short walk or sending that text you've been putting off. These actions may seem insignificant, but they carry profound meaning. Each one is a statement: I'm still here. I'm still fighting. You see, depression tells you that nothing matters, that your efforts are pointless. But every time you choose to act, you're proving it wrong. And here's the philosophical catch: it's not the magnitude of the action that matters, it's the intention behind it. When you choose to engage with life, even in the smallest ways, you're reclaiming your agency. You're reminding yourself that you do have control, even if it feels like you don't. Let's go a bit deeper. Have you ever noticed how depression often makes you feel powerless, as if life is something happening to you? But when you start making these small decisions, when you choose to act, you're shifting from a passive role to an active one. You're no longer a spectator in your own life. You're stepping back into the driver's seat, even if the road ahead feels uncertain. And isn't that what life is, in its essence? A series of choices, of actions, of moments where we decide to engage with the world, despite the uncertainty. Here's something to reflect on. Maybe the path back from depression isn't about fixing yourself, but about remembering yourself, remembering that you have the power to act, the power to choose, even in the face of overwhelming doubt or numbness. And maybe, just maybe, these small acts of defiance are more than just steps toward recovery. Maybe they're the very essence of what it means to be human, the ability to choose, even in the darkest times. So, what will you choose today? What small act of defiance will you take against the pull of depression? Remember, it doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be yours. Because in the end, these small, intentional choices aren't just about reclaiming your life, they're about reclaiming yourself. And that is the most profound act of all.